There are 3 days left in November, one more month left in 2021. Can you believe that we're just 34 days away from a new year? That's just crazy for me. It seems like it was just yesterday that we were thanking God that 2020 was over and looking forward to a better 2021. And you know what? This year has been a lot better for many of us. We've been blessed this year and more than we deserve. But let me ask you this. Do you think you've received every blessing that God desired to release into your life this year? Look, maybe I have an overactive imagination, but I believe that each of us has this gigantic Amazon distribution center sized warehouse in heaven where God stored all of the blessings that He desires to give over the course of this year. And if you've claimed everything that God had for you, then at this point, that warehouse should be virtually empty, right? I know we have a few weeks to go, and there are probably still a few blessings left to redeem. Maybe an annual end of the year bonus at work, or perhaps you're expecting something special for Christmas. I mean, who knows? You might be meeting your soulmate on New Year's Eve just before midnight. But in general, do you feel you've received everything that God wanted to give you this year? For me, I don't think I did. And to be honest with you, I don't think you did either. I mean, think about this. Was there something that you have been praying for that you haven't gotten an answer on yet? Are there certain promises from God that you've been waiting for to come to pass that hasn't so far? Are there things that you hoped would happen that hadn't happened this year yet? Same for me too. There were certain blessings that just never arrived. Hey, think about this. Is it possible that this is something to do with the supply chain disruptions that we've been experiencing lately? In one way or another, we've all been impacted by supply chain issues. Have you noticed that there are fewer things that you can get next day on Amazon Prime? Or have you been to Walmart and found certain shelves are empty, or that the products and brands that you usually buy are in short supply? I hope you did your Christmas shopping early this year, friends, because if you are just getting started, your kids may not get that Xbox or that new smartphone until February next year. I read this article a few weeks ago that said every day there are hundreds of boats just off the coast of Los Angeles and Long Beach with hundreds of thousands of containers filled with tens of millions of products that can't get through to you and me. Is it possible that we have not received all of God's blessings in 2021 because something similar is happening in the spiritual realm? Has the demand for answered prayer begun to outpace God's capacity to meet our needs? Is there a scarcity of raw materials needed in heaven that has slowed down the production of our blessings? Is it possible that there is a worker shortage in heaven, or port logistic issues here on earth, or warehousing problems in heaven? The obvious answer is, of course not. But if you're starting to feel that answers to your prayer are being delayed, or that certain promises are not being fulfilled in your life, let me briefly explain some of the spiritual logistics that might be blocking your blessings. And let's start with the understanding that there are two types of blessings stored in God's spiritual warehouse for us. The first are gifts from God. These are non-conditional blessings that God chooses to release into our lives simply because He loves us. These are things that you've done nothing special to deserve. God has just chosen to bless you with that opportunity, with that possession, in that relationship, or as it relates to your job or your ministry. And then there are rewards from God. These conditional blessings where God says, if my son or daughter does this, I'm going to bless him or her in this way. And though I've never been able to do an inventory of our spiritual warehouse to confirm this, I strongly believe that many of our blessings fall into that latter category of rewards. Our actions either trigger these benefits to be released into our lives, or they can postpone them. But because we don't make this distinction between gifts and rewards, I believe that our spiritual warehouse in heaven is filled with boatloads of unclaimed rewards that either get blocked, postponed, or sometimes end up even being canceled. So between today's conversation and next week's message, I want to show you the difference between those actions that block our blessings and those that accelerate our breakthrough. And there's perhaps no better example that illustrates how this works than the period in Israel's history when they were on the threshold of taking possession of the promised land. Listen to what the first few verses of Numbers 13 says. The Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe send one of its leaders." So at the Lord's command, Moses sent them out from the desert of Paran. All of them were leaders of the Israelites. Up until that point, God had released a lot of unconditional blessings into their lives. He had set them free from their bondage. He had overthrown Egypt, the most powerful nation on earth at the time. He had guided them, kept them warm, and fed them and protected them, all because he loved them. They did nothing to deserve any of these provisions. In fact, it is through this unconditional love that the nation had many months to develop confidence that God was strong enough and smart enough and loving enough to meet all of their needs. And in the first couple of verses of Numbers 13, God invites these 12 men to cross over into the promised land. What I find so interesting about this story is that verse 2 says that it was God's idea to have these men explore the land before they attacked. But here's the thing, I don't think this was a reconnaissance mission. He doesn't send them there to evaluate the opposition. I think he sends them there to see the opportunities. I've heard the story of a Nike shoe salesman that is sent to an island of indigenous tribes to try to sell shoes. But within hours, the salesman radios the boat to pick him up because he discovers that the people there didn't wear shoes. The next day, a second salesman from Adidas shows up. Within an hour, he radios the company and requests that it airdrops 500 pair of shoes because the people didn't have shoes. He didn't see their bare feet as an opposition. He saw it as an opportunity. I think this is why God sent the men to explore the territory in Canaan. He wanted them to see that the land was flowing with milk and honey. He wanted them to see that the land was so fertile that it produced fruit that required several men to carry it. But instead of being inspired by the promise, they took inventory of the problem. So for me, the question becomes, if God knew that this would happen, why did he suggest sending the spies in the first place? And here's what I think. I believe he wanted to put the Israelites in a position to choose between the feedback of the spies, the facts about the situation, their feelings about the challenges they would face, and even their fears about fighting, and compare that to the faith that at this point they should have had in their Father. Friends, anytime God invites us to step out on his promises, we have to make a decision to believe what we see, what we think, and what we feel, or to believe in our Father. If you look at Israel's response, you'll discover one of the biggest obstacles that blocked their blessings and that block ours too. This is what it says beginning in verse 31. It says, "But the men who had gone up with him said, 'We can't attack these people. They are stronger than we are.' And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, 'The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size.'" Can you see what was limiting them here? God said, "Go and take possession of the land. I'm guaranteeing you the victory personally." And Israel's response to God's invitation was no. We've taken a poll, and more than 80% of us, 10 out of every 12 Jews surveyed, suggest that we can't trust you. Which leads to one of the biggest disruptions to our spiritual supply chain, disbelief. This is where we cut off the flow of God's blessings in our lives because we don't believe him. When we fail to believe God, we are offending his character. When we don't take God at his word, we're saying, "God, I don't think you're strong enough to accomplish what you said. I look at the difficulty of my circumstances, and I don't think that you're smart enough to make this work. Or I'm not sure if you're loving enough to have my best interest in mind. Or maybe you're not faithful enough to keep your promise." Friends, when was the last time you've used any of these words in conversation with God? Probably never. But every time we fail to respond to God's invitation to step out in faith, this is what we're saying with our actions. Now, I know it seems that disobedience is what blocked Israel's blessings in Numbers 13. I've heard a lot of sermons that focus on this, and it's partly right. But the root cause of that disobedience was disbelief. And what you see in the remainder of the book of Numbers are blessings that were supposed to be released into their lives within a matter of months, but that were postponed for more than 40 years because of their disbelief. And here's where we should stop and ask ourselves, what blessings have we missed out on this year because we have been held back by the feedback of people around us, or the facts about the situation that we've compiled, or our feelings about the challenges that we're facing, or even our fear of failure, instead of choosing to express our faith in our Father? And friends, I get it. Sometimes what God tells us to do is so contradictory to what we think should happen in a particular situation or what makes sense. I've been there. You're broke and God instructs you to give. You're hurt and he asks you to forgive. You're tired and he wants you to go even further. Or you're scared and he wants you to fight. And when he speaks into our lives, we have a choice to make, to either stay broke and hurt and tired and scared, or we can believe God for our breakthrough. Now, today we've only had a chance to look at disbelief as one of the disruptors that block our blessings. Next week, I want to talk about a couple of more of them. Before I wrap up, though, I want you to take a moment and think about some of those blessings that you were hoping would happen this year that didn't. Those prayers and promises that you'd hope would come to fruition in 2021, and unless it happens in the next 35 days, it's not going to happen at all. Take a few moments and consider how disbelief may be blocking your blessing in that particular area of opportunity. If doubt and distrust and disbelief postpones our blessings, then I want you to consider how faith works to activate, release, and even accelerate our breakthrough in those specific areas of life. Friends, you've trusted God for salvation. You've trusted Him for eternal life. Isn't it time to trust Him with that area of your life too?